Sometimes the most profound moments in history aren't captured in entire volumes of books, but in just a single sentence. And today, that's exactly what we're going to focus on. One sentence, a statement that marks the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in all of human history. The Nazi regime began systematic murder of Jews and other groups, including Roma, disabled individuals, and political prisoners. Just let that sink in for a moment. Every single word in that sentence is packed with so much weight, so much meaning. In fact, our entire explainer today is going to be dedicated to carefully unpacking this one sentence, just to try and grasp the full gravity of what it's describing. So let's get started. So we're really going to treat this as our foundation for today. This isn't just a random fact pulled from a history book. It's a starting point, and it's one that really needs us to look at it carefully, deliberately, if we're going to have any hope of understanding just how big its scope really is. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to take it apart, piece by piece. We'll look at each phrase, each specific word choice, because by doing that, we can start to build a much clearer and honestly, a much more profound understanding of everything that came after. Okay, so first up, let's talk about the nature of the crime itself. The sentence uses two very, very specific words to describe what happened. Systematic murder. Just those two words together. They were chosen so deliberately. This wasn't some spontaneous act of chaos, right? It wasn't just random violence that got out of hand. No, this was something else entirely, something much more chilling. So let's really dig into that first word. What does systematic actually mean in this context? What does it imply? What is it telling us about how this was all carried out? Well, it means there was a system, right? A method. It tells us this was an intentional, centrally planned operation. We're not talking about random acts of hate. We're talking about the cold, calculated logic of a modern government being turned toward mass murder. It's like bureaucracy itself was weaponized. I mean, think about it. This required train schedules. It required detailed records, industrial-scale facilities, a whole state apparatus. All the tools you'd associate with a modern society were pointed towards this one single, horrific goal. That's the truly chilling meaning behind that one word, systematic. Okay, so we've looked at the nature of the crime, the what. Now let's turn to the victims. The sentence shifts our focus from the act itself to the people who were targeted, the who. The sentence starts by identifying Jewish people. They were the primary target of the Nazi ideology and the genocide that followed. 6 million Jewish people were murdered in the Holocaust. But as the sentence makes clear, it didn't stop there. And this is so important to understand. The Nazi regime's ideology of persecution, of so-called purification, was incredibly wide-ranging. They essentially created this twisted hierarchy of human value, and they set out to eliminate anyone they considered unworthy or an enemy of the state. And this just shows you the sheer breadth of that persecution. You had the Roma people, who were also targeted for extermination based on racial ideology. You had individuals with physical and mental disabilities who were systematically murdered in what the state horrifyingly called euthanasia programs. And of course, the regime went after its political opponents. Literally anyone who dared to speak out or dissent was often imprisoned and killed. Okay, so for the final piece of this puzzle, let's go all the way back to the very first words of the sentence. Because this part, it frames the entire thing, not as an end, but as a beginning. The Nazi regime began. Just that one word, began. That's the key right there. This whole sentence, as horrific as it is only describing a starting point. It's pinpointing the exact moment a government turned its hateful ideology into an organized, state-sponsored process of murder. This wasn't the whole story. It was just the genesis of a horror that would go on for years and years. So let's put it all back together and look at it one last time. The Nazi regime began systematic murder of Jews and other groups, including Roma, disabled individuals, and political prisoners. Now that we've broken it down, every single part just hits differently, doesn't it? The Nazi regime began. That's an act of the state. Systematic murder, a planned industrial process. Jews and other groups, a chillingly wide net of persecution. It looks like a simple sentence, but when you understand it, its meaning is just profoundly disturbing. And that brings us to a final, really important question I want to leave you with. We all know how vital it is to understand the full story of the Holocaust. But what we've seen today is just how important it is to understand its beginning. So why is it so crucial for us to remember not just the terrible totality of what happened, but the precise, deliberate, and systematic way it all began.